It's been 7 days of rage leading to a total shutdown in Kenya as the young people have taken to the streets and even to the parliament protesting the passing of the finance bill. President William Ruto has addressed the people of Kenya, and this morning on the show we'll be speaking to guests from Kenya to give us a live report of what is going on, what the projection for the future is like in Kenya. I am Olive Emodi.
And I am Osaugi Ogbawan. Yes, of course, our Kenyan brothers seem to be having a really tough time. Of course, there have been reported casualties. I've seen the pictures or videos of a few people who lost their lives at the protest yesterday. The Kenyan President, William Ruto, also put out a statement yesterday appealing for calm. These are some of the things that we will be x-raying this morning. But from what it looks like, it feels like it is, pent-up anger. It's not just about the finance bill. And that's the thing that always happens in protests across the continent. One thing triggers it, of course everybody then brings out their different reasons to protest and pours it all, in one moment. So it is, a moment to x-ray William Ruto's government and also Uhuru Kenyatta and all the previous Kenyan leaders and how well they've run the country in a long while. But here in Lagos, people spent 7, 8, some even 10 hours on the road yesterday just trying to make it home. Simply, of course, because it rained. So let's bring in Judith at TV this morning. She joins us with breakfast headlines. Judith, did you have any stories, with the rain yesterday?
Unfortunately, I didn't. Fortunately for me, I would say I didn't. I was in my house the entirety of yesterday, except for a couple of errands here and there. But I didn't have to be stuck in traffic as those who are resident on the island or on the part where it always gets very flooded. Really, for me, it was easy peasy.
It was terrible. I know a few people who spend 7 to 8 hours, on a journey that maybe would take 8 minutes, 10 minutes max if you're really slow. And I got home around 11:30 after being between, I'm not sure if you know Durusimieti, so between Durusimieti and Falao Shibo, which is on the average, on a really slow drive, 5 minutes. That's a 2 minute, that's a 1 minute 30-second drive. That is between the Lekki Mosque and Falao Shibo. So I'm saying basically
like 3 minutes, 2-3 minutes.
Yeah, if you're driving just 2 tires, it's a 1 minute 30 seconds drive, to be honest.
And how long did you spend?
It took me 3 hours to get between Durusimieti and Falao Shibo. I was on Durusimieti by 8:30 p.m. I got home at 11:45 p.m. and I still didn't get to park the car inside the house because I couldn't even drive inside my house. The whole road was blocked. It was bad yesterday. Sometime around 12:30 a.m. I came out to try once again to see if I could park. There were still people, it's a terrible situation that people had to deal with yesterday. I know a person who really was trying to make it between 2 places around Lekki Phase 1, and she spent 8 hours on the road and still didn't get there. Again, this is a journey that max should take 10 minutes.
Yes, I mean, these are just horror stories. And just like Judith, I'm grateful that we're able to leave right after the show. And I was in my house all day. Yesterday was not the right day to be outside.
Yeah.
There are people who were going to pick their kids from school. I did see James Omokwe, the movie producer, sharing his experience. Going to pick his kid from school, had been in the traffic for hours. A parent had helped him pick his kid, take the kid to their house, which was near the school, and he had still not gotten to the kid at about 8 p.m. Of course, a number of people expressing their frustration, calling out President Sanwo-Olu, who was yesterday seen having a good time celebrating with the Adele case. But what this reminds us is we do have challenges with our drainage systems that need to be sorted. We do have challenges with, these drainages, these canals, the buildings. We probably need to revisit the conversation for what the plan is, regarding these tracks. And we didn't have to wait for the rainy season for all of this to happen. A number of people would then say, oh, this is why they've been demolishing buildings, or people have been complaining about demolitions and all that.
Yeah, but for me, it really just, it's a reminder that, Lagos as a mega city still deserves a lot of work. There's still so much that the city lacks. If you look at things that you would require, to live in a city that that you can call a mega city, provides you with the most basic sense of, sanity. Lagos still lacks a whole lot. If just rainfall could deal with Lagosians that badly yesterday, it really tells a lot,
and there's more that's still to come. There is more that's still to come because, and this happens yearly. I've had my fair share of this horror stories that you're sharing in my time living on the island and also working on the island as well. So Lagos has had its fair share of horror stories when it comes to this flooding. This is not the first time this will happen this next year. It would happen the year after and all the way until maybe it's a never-ending world. So I do not know when it will end. Yeah. But one thing is certain, right? This administration has been, or rather the ruling party, have held the state for as long as possible. Since the inception of the Third or the Fourth Republic, which is, of course, is democracy, for 25 years, we've had one party be in charge of this state. And they have, sold themselves as the people who built this city. And so it begs to ask the question, what exactly did you build? Because you sold the wetlands, which is nature's way of tackling, the flooding. That it is very, Lagos State and the way it's designed by nature is susceptible to rainforest, torrential rain, as well as flooding. But you sand-filled the parts that are meant to be for, the natural flow of water. You sold out the wetlands, and that is by extension, Dolphin Estate, Foreshore Estate, Morocco, and these other areas. You sold them out to real estate companies who have sand-filled them, and now people who live there are the elites. And so when you sell all of this, what are we going to have? I don't think it's drainages. I don't think it's plastic waste. I don't think it's any of these things. I strongly believe that the people who are in power are the ones who have put us in this mess.
I may take a slightly different position. I do agree with you that based on how Lagos is built, Lagos is a coastal city, and we're surrounded by a lot of water. So I think, however, that it's a mixture of all these elements that you've spoken about. It's a mixture of the fact that, or a combination rather, of all these elements. When we don't have the maybe best infrastructure, we don't have the best road networks, there's still buildings that need to be sorted out. Our drainages are in some cases blocked. We're still trafficking in plastic. And this is, of course, climate change. The impact of climate change is felt around the world. So there are going to be heavier rains, and I do not know what that would look like. We're just in June. We haven't gotten to July, where we're looking at 7 days rain. It's going to get worse.
If you've had a flooding problem for 20 years and you've still not fixed it, climate change is not to blame. If you've had a problem for 20 years and you've still not been able to sort it out and fix it for the people that you govern, I would not blame climate change. Climate change will happen regardless of whatever government is in office. But if you've had a problem, listen, I'm not an expert, and I wouldn't mention these technical terms of how we can sort out the flooding in Lagos, and I don't know. But I know that there's been a government in Lagos for more than 20 years. And if we've not been able to sort out these little details here and there, it's not climate change that should be blamed. It is the people who are responsible for fixing these issues and how important that they've taken these issues. That's where I always lie. And I would always be there to remind government of its responsibilities and its responsibilities to the people who pay taxes in Lagos, the people who they of course campaigned to govern in every single level in Lagos. And it's not just the current government in Lagos, it's every government that has, of course, held Lagos. And
not just in Lagos. I mean, Abuja is also experiencing the same thing. Trademore Estate is currently being submerged in water. So yes.
I say the same thing, even Edo State. Edo State had its own years of flooding, and I remember that I always would be willing to call out the government in Edo State. Lucky Gbenedion, Adams Oshomola, everybody who had a role to play in Edo State, until we started to see some level of sanity with regards to flooding. Everyone who's responsible must be called out. It's nothing personal.
And might I just add that the Met, which is the Meteorological Organization of Nigeria, they've also put out a PSA months ago saying that there's going to be more torrential rain this year. And they stated all of the states that will be flooded. And now they've put out this thing, right? Let's wait to see what the governors who are affected by this predicted flooding, let's see what they will do. 2 years ago, this happened in Kogi and different other parts of the state that normally don't see that level of flooding because of the dam that was opened. Now they're giving out another warning. Let's see.
All right. We'll speak with you in a bit. You're going to be sharing with us breakfast headlines, but for now, let's share with our viewers what our top stories are this morning on Breakfast Central.
Kenya's anti-tax protest turns violent, multiple persons dead. We're joined by guests from Kenya to extract this conversation. And FEC halts wage memo for further consultation is one of the stories that we're looking at this morning. still on Breakfast Central.
Counter-terrorism expert urged Nigerian media to be more sensitive. And also, we'll be x-raying the social impact of drug abuse crisis in Nigeria. The newspaper front page is also coming your way this morning. What are the major stories making headlines across Nigeria? We'll be sharing with you.
Now begin breakfast headlines with news from Nigeria, where members of the National Transition Committee of the Nigerian Labour Congress on Tuesday stormed the Labour Party headquarters in Abuja, calling for the immediate resignation of National Chairman Julius Abure. Led by Acting Chairman Abdulwaheed Omar, the NLC members arrived at the Secretariat chanting solidarity songs and demanding Abure step down, citing the expiration of his tenure. The protest marks a significant move by the Labour Union to influence the party's leadership. And more than 24 hours after the oust council chairman defied police order in Rivers State, South Nigeria, to protest across the 23 local government areas due to the ongoing political crisis in the LGAs. Top political leaders from the different wards of Obiakpo local government area of the state have held a solidarity march for the FCT minister Nyesom Wike. The controller of Apapa Area Command of the Nigeria Customs Service, Babatunde Olumo, Tuesday joined the commander of NDLEA Apapa Special Area Command and other government agencies in the port in a walk to commemorate the 2024 International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Drug Trafficking. The customs boss noted that such collaboration between sister agencies of government is crucial for intelligence sharing and ensuring public safety. In the meantime, Human Rights Watch has appealed to Mali's ruling junta to release 10 individuals jailed for advocating a return to civilian governance. The rights group condemned this as the latest attack on political opposition in the country. The detainees, including prominent figures who had signed a declaration in March advocating for the restoration of democracy, were apprehended, during a private meeting in the capital, Bamako. Since seizing power in 2020, the junta has imposed strict bans on political party gatherings, tightening its grip on dissent. In a statement, Human Rights Watch highlighted the junta's escalating crackdown on peaceful dissent, political opposition, civil society, and the media since the military coup. And as protests continue in Kenya, East Africa, 4 protesters have been shot outside Parliament, and NGO, the Kenya Human Rights Commission, has said. It says one person has been killed. This has not been confirmed yet. Now, thousands of anti-tax protesters in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, pushed their way into the complex where its parliament sits. Now, with reports of people being wounded as police fired rounds to disperse the crowds. In the meantime, the Kenya Human Rights Commission has condemned the act, calling such actions unacceptable and constituting a grave violation of human rights. And on to North Africa, Libya says it's repatriated 174 irregular migrants to Nigeria, including dozens of women and 6 children. The operation, according to the Libyan government, marks the beginning of a series of planned returns in the coming weeks. Now, this announcement was made by Mohamed Barida, the head of the Libyan Interior Ministry's organization tasked with curbing irregular migration. He noted that the International Organization for Migration is assisting with the effort through its voluntary humanitarian return program, which aids vulnerable migrants stranded in Libya or wishing to return home. Now, Libya has become a major hub for human trafficking and smuggling, exploiting the instability that has persisted since the fall of dictator Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. And now to Southern Africa, as South Africans wait with bated breath for the announcement of President Ramaphosa's cabinet, Corruption Watch says it is evident that yet another new era promised in his inauguration speech is off to a rocky start as ANC is far from ending corruption in the country. Now, this follows the swearing in of former Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Zizi Kwadwo, who has been sworn in as an ANC Member of Parliament despite facing serious corruption charges for allegedly accepting a 1.7 million rand bribe. And that's all on Breakfast Headlines. It's back to Lady Olive and Sir Osa.
Thank you very much for bringing us Breakfast Headlines. We wish the South African people all the best. I mean, the speculations have it that within 24 to 36 hours, we should probably get that announcement from President Cyril Ramaphosa. But we wish them and the government of national unity all the best. We'll see you again at 9 a.m.
You're welcome.
All right, that's all on Breakfast Headlines. Let's go on a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be looking...
Welcome once again. Nigerian journalists have been tasked to be more sensitive in reporting conflicts and violent extremism so as not to promote the objectives of terrorist groups. This was during a training organized by the National Center for Counter-Terrorism for Defense correspondents in Abuja. Amading Uyi reports.
Nigeria has been battling a homegrown insurgency in the last 12 years. While this has led to the death of thousands, millions have also been displaced, therefore putting a strain on governance. Nigeria's Minister of Information and National Orientation says that this is evident of the effects of terrorism as it stalls national development, which affects the lives of citizens.
It is important for all of us to know that terrorists are not just fighting a physical war on all of us. They are also fighting a psychological one. Terrorism is not a merely physical threat. It is an ideological battle of the mind, with the extremist groups exploiting our vulnerabilities, spreading fear, and propagating messages that present them as fighting for a social cause, in order to further their depraved agenda of crippling our nation.
As counter-terrorism experts converge on Abuja for a training of journalists in the country, they say that training is key as it will help promote peace and improve conflict-sensitive reporting. They say the role of the media cannot be overemphasized, as it provides government with alternatives to extremist ideologies.
This training is being conducted to build the capacity of journalists in the country in order to promote peace, education, patriotism, and encourage conflict-sensitive reporting towards attaining Mr. President's vision of guaranteeing a safer and peaceful Nigeria for all citizens.
In the fight against terrorism, the media can either undermine or bolster our collective efforts to provide alternatives to extremist ideologies. And this is very important, alternatives to extremist ideologies.
They also add that Nigerian journalists can contribute effectively to the war against terrorism, playing key roles as partners to government.
Journalists are strategic partners in the fight against terrorism and violent extremism, and they offer various perspectives on insecurity, social, economic, and political issues to the public through their contents.
Journalists who were in attendance were also tasked to be more sensitive in reporting conflicts. In Abuja for News Central, I am Amading Uyi.
Well, interesting report there, and of course, thanks to Amading Uyi for that one from the Federal Capital Territory. Now, moving away from Nigeria to the eastern part of the continent, thousands of protesters stormed Kenya's parliament to oppose new tax proposals on Tuesday. Part of the building was even set on fire, forcing lawmakers to flee. The protests against the controversial finance bill led to clashes between police and demonstrators, resulting in 5 deaths, according to the Kenya Medical Association.
The outrage spread beyond Nairobi to other parts of Kenya. Kenyan President William Ruto blamed the clashes on criminals, who he says hijacked the protests, calling the events treasonous. He vowed to end the unrest at whatever cost. This right here is the most direct assault on the government in decades. Joining us this morning is political analyst and communications expert Awino Gilbert and the acting director, Kenyan section of the International Commission of Jurists, Demas Kiprono. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for joining the conversation. I'll begin the conversation with Awino Gilbert. Okay, he might not be joining us, but we'll talk to Mr. Demas. There's a lot of, it's been 7 days of outrage, really. Yesterday was a total shutdown. What we've seen is something that I do not know that Kenyans foresaw will happen in William Ruto's administration, especially because he was heralded as this person who will bring about the change that Kenyans so desire. Yesterday, he gave a speech and referred to some of these people as criminals. What would you say, the current situation is, and what is the impact of William Ruto's speech yesterday?
Well, yes. So for the past 7 days, Kenyans, especially young Kenyans, we call them Gen Z, have been going to the streets. We've been organizing online protest the finance bill that they say is out of touch with the reality of the cost of living. They also say that government needs to prioritize better, not to overtax people, but rather live within its means. And for last Tuesday, last Thursday, and yesterday, they occupied the streets to express displeasure with this bill. What we have seen is unprecedented. We've never seen parliament buildings breached by members of the public who are enraged and who feel like the leaders do not listen to them. We have seen also a lot of death and destruction, a lot of unlawful use of force, a lot of the use of live bullets against protesters. And we've also seen protests all over the country, not just Nairobi. But what we expected is that there would be a coming and a calling of Kenyans to come together to talk, to dialogue. Instead, the president characterized the protests as being led by criminals, infiltrators, and promised to find out who the financiers were, and also even termed the actions as treasonous. And perhaps this is because many security installations, organs of government were attacked because the county offices attacked courts, and including parliament buildings. And so I think it's really a time when Kenyans need to reflect about the role of the governed in government, the role of public participation as promised by the Constitution, and freedom of expression and freedom to assemble and to associate with each other. And how can we do that in lawful means, and how can the police also ensure that while protecting life and property, that they do not violate the rules of the international rules in terms of the use of force and firearms, which is also reflected in the National Police Service Act of Kenya. And so we find ourselves in a situation where the ruling elite, our representatives in parliament, are out of tune with the feelings of the majority of the masses. And the deaths that we witnessed yesterday, and this is an unfolding story because throughout the night we heard that we could hear gunshots in certain areas, and so we expect that death toll will rise considerably, and we really hope that we can pause as a country to reflect on what just happened.
Mr. Kiprono, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Okay. Well, I want to ask about the rage that we're seeing, all right? The story is that it's coming because of the finance bill, this tax increase that has caused, the level of outrage that we're seeing in the last 7 days. But, the Kenyan president did mention, according to him, that this protest has been taken over by criminals and he's going to investigate. So is there a possibility that this is pent-up anger from many other things, or, Kenyans really decided to go all the way to the Senate building, destroy parts of the Senate building, and, carry out this amount of rage just because of this finance bill? Has there been other things that have maybe angered Kenyans since William Ruto took over government?
Yes, I think Kenyans feel that the taxation that is imposed on them is not translated into services. And we understand that the Ruto administration has said that they inherited a lot of debt from the previous regimes, and so that they're trying to balance Kenya's balance sheet by prioritizing paying back debt. And so there have been a lot of taxes included over the last year and this year now, the proposed finance bill. There have been a cutting back on certain public spending, monies for women when they're giving birth, health insurance for children in schools. There has been an increase in university education fees. And so they feel that they're being burdened more, whereas the services the government is giving them is less.
All right.
And the cost of living is going higher.
Okay.
And so these taxes proposed an increase in fuel, an increase in the price of bread, a tax on having a vehicle, and they felt that this was a tipping point. And so there has been a pent-up anger among Kenyans that they're saying that these taxes are not really translating into services.
And this has been a complaint that has been going on for a while, even though right now they're talking about totally scrapping the finance bill as opposed to, looking at some amendments. Let's now bring in Awino Gilbert to the conversation. But before we bring you in, we have a video of President William Ruto in his address yesterday. So let's take a look at it, and then we'll have you react. All right. This was part of his speech. He said, "My fellow Kenyans, I come to you with a heavy heart, saddened by the loss of lives occasioned by the current situation prevailing in our country. It's the right of every Kenyan to protest as determined by the Constitution we all promulgated in 2010. It is also the duty of leaders to listen to those they lead. At this trying time for our country, I want to remind all leaders that they were elected by the people. Listening to the people is not a choice, but a mandate enshrined in the principles of our Constitution and in every basis of philosophy of democracy." And I'll pause there. Mr. Awino Gilbert, would you say that the way that this matter has been handled, that President William Ruto has shown sufficient or demonstrated that he's listening to the cries of the Kenyan people? And would you say that the situation, he has it under control, or is it something that the government is completely overwhelmed by at this moment?
Yeah, thank you very much. From the speech that the president gave, we had hoped that he would be more compassionate with Kenyans, especially those young boys who lost their lives. Remember that even before they got into town, the police had barricaded all the major entry points. So their entry into town was essentially through their unrelenting efforts. To your question, do I think the president is sufficiently handling the matter, or is he really in control as it should be? The answer is no, but it is true to the character of William Ruto, who is the president of the Republic of Kenya. Naturally, he is a person who is in control of all the other organs of the state. All the MPs allied to him sing to his tune. All the other organs of government have to do what he has to do. And therefore, even as he gave the speech yesterday, the surprising thing is that he knows that why Kenyans are frustrated is because of the finance bill, which essentially is a confirmation of what Kenyans have been saying, that yes, you say the previous regime had messed the state, but what you're doing, you're leaving so large as if you're leading a very rich country. For example, his State House budget has been proposed from around 5 billion to 15 billion shillings, and yet there is no alcohol taken there. The previous regime had it at 4 billion. There have been the deputy president and their spouses, their location is so astronomical that Kenyans are saying that, yes, you're saying life is hard, but you're not really in tune with what we feel. So therefore, what happened yesterday, as true to your question, indeed, this was long time coming, because Kenyans have said that enough is enough, we can feel this, but you seem not to be listening to us as Kenyans. Yeah. That's the feeling on the ground.
Yeah, pretty much, very similar situation that, we're hearing from people here in Nigeria, criticizing the current government here in the country, saying, of course, you don't seem to be listening to us. You seem to be, of course, freely, spending money on government personal projects compared to what you're, of course, affording Nigerians. So it feels like it is a similar situation across the whole continent, but Kenya and Nigeria seem to be twinning at this point. I want to ask you what William Ruto can do at this point that would calm the nerves of the Kenyan people and make them go back home. What do you think would put an end to the protest, or is it possible that it has gotten to the stage? 5 lives have been lost. Has it gotten to the stage where it is just going to continue getting worse?
Thank you. It's interesting to note that where there were major protests are areas that predominantly voted for Ruto. Originally, in the previous, in the past, there have been opposition protests, but usually just witnessed in Kisumu. Yesterday, we saw his hometown, Eldoret. They vandalized property belonging to his close ally, Oscar Sudi, who has been seen to dish money every weekend in tunes of millions of shillings. We saw in Nyeri, where he was overwhelmingly voted, looting a supermarket belonging to one of the MPs who voted for the bill. So essentially, what Ruto can do is first to appeal to his voting base, which he seems to be losing, first and foremost. 2, the youth that did not vote in the last, remember when we had our conversation just after he won the elections, the majority of the voters were between 30 and 40 years. To date, if you look at the register, the people who have come out to call Gen Z, the people between 18 years and 25, who are the majority of the Kenyan population. And if they take sufficient voting cards, then they can tip the numbers that he got last time. So that Ruto must maintain his support base to calm the situation. 2, he must also seem to be listening as per the promises that he gave. He promised to reduce the cost of living. He promised to reduce the cost of school fees. He promised everything possible to make life better. But the reverse has been the case. Life has gotten harder and harder and harder. And at one point he says, tighten your belts because it's not going to be any cheaper. The last thing that I think Ruto needs to do is that when you deliver a speech around a particular occurrence, the grandstanding that was witnessed by his speech, yes, he said he stands with Kenyans, but if you judge his body language, even at the end of his speech, normally he ends by saying, God bless Kenya. But yesterday it was a very tough speech under 7 minutes that said thank you, and he went. And he basically just characterized those protesters as criminals who will be dealt with conclusively. So William Ruto must begin to show compassion to Kenyans, speak to them from their heart and converse so that they can be listened to. Much of the rage that you see is because it is perceived that the current government does not listen. When the finance bill was initially brought to Parliament, the issue of a motor vehicle tax was a major matter which finally he had to remove. The issue of taxing eco-levy for a sanitary child, he removed. The issue of KRA, getting into your private data just to check how much you have, they removed. And that, in that sense, they were seen to be listening. However, even when they have done such amendments, Kenyans still feel that must we make so much noise for you to remove just a few things? And what else is in this bill that we don't know? So therefore, you want to give us time so that we interrogate because we cannot trust you. We think that you operate with your interest in mind and not with our interest.
All right.
So he has to be.
Let's now bring in Mr. Kiprono into the conversation and look at the role that the opposition has to play. In the past few years, or maybe 1 year plus, that President William Ruto has been in office. Let's talk about Azimiola Umoja and Raila Odinga. Raila Odinga has spoken openly about this finance bill. He's asked President William Ruto not to sign it. We've seen the MPs for Azimio as well, who have stood their ground. They initially made suggestions regarding the amendments to the bill, but now they have said that the bill should be completely withdrawn. It should not be passed. So first of all, It's past the second reading. So it's now in the hands of President William Ruto. Do you see him signing it? And secondly, how strong an opposition has Abure been in the current administration? And how much influence would you say they wield?
Currently, there is an unofficial, let's say, handshake between the opposition and the executive. The government is actively campaigning for Honorable Raila to be the chairperson of the African Union. And so the opposition actually has not been as strong as it usually is on such issues. And perhaps what complicates the matter so much is that, and that's why the government really has not had a clue on how to deal with this round of protests, is that it doesn't have political leadership. It is quite an amorphous movement that started from the ground, started online, and the leaders are not really known. In fact, over the past week, there have been, especially over the past 72 hours, there have been intensive abductions of persons who are later released, perhaps they are arrested so that the government can try to figure out who is leading this. And from our observation is that there's really no structure to this movement that is going on, led by the youth, led by active citizens, that heavily involves the middle class, which is not what we usually see. We usually see protests that are led from the top by the opposition leadership. So the opposition, I think, from where I stand, is taking advantage of, they want to be the right side of history, right side of they want to appeal to the people who are protesting, who are all over the country. But I do not think they really have that much of an impact in terms of how this goes.
Right.
As for the signing of the bill, I do not know, but I think if the president has powers to reject, to sign, and put in some reservations, then send it back to Parliament. Many think that if he does that, that will be good for the country because it might calm down the nerves. It might give dialogue a chance.
All right, let's
perhaps this country needs dialogue right now.
All right, now let's take the conversation again to a different angle, and just to bring back Mr. Gilbert. Earlier on, I read a speech, graphics. We had a speech, and that was from former President Uhuru Kenyatta. And I want to talk about the role that he might have played in all of this, especially because Kenya has a lot of debt it's looking to repay, which in some way is, quote unquote, encouraging the government to increase taxation as a source of revenue generation, as opposed to maybe taking more loans. Talk about the role that former President Uhuru Kenyatta played in ensuring that Kenya is where it is today, and what is his current stand about the protests that are ongoing, especially the finance bill as well.
Yeah, thank you. First, before I get to that question, I would want to say that I can assure you that President Ruto will assent to that bill, because much of what has been put into that bill, he has spoken about them long before they even get to his table. He has been in government from 1997, sitting as a member of parliament, and then he became the deputy. He knows he's more experienced than those MPs. Actually, they get instructions from him. He will assent to the bill. Now, on the role of former President Uhuru Kenyatta, Kenya has an election cycle of 5 years, and the president can go for only 2 terms. After that, you go, and you're elected on the basis of the promise of what you're going to do better. President William Ruto was part of Uhuru Kenyatta's government until he retired, because his office is a constitutional office. It has been said time again by this current regime that the mess that we find ourselves in was actually brought to us by Uhuru Kenyatta, who got himself into so much debt. But it is interesting to note that within the short period of time that we have had the Ruto government, he has actually borrowed much more than the president borrowed in 10 years. If you look at currently what he has taken, if you prorate what he has taken in the next 2 years, he will have surpassed what the president had borrowed. It has been also said that the former president was funding the opposition, and even in his speech, he alluded to the fact that there seems to be some people who are funding these protesters, which I would want to agree to Mr. Kiprono's assertion that indeed that is not true, because the protesters are people who are basically using Twitter and social media platforms. President Uhuru Kenyatta yesterday just played the role of a father of a nation. If you looked at his speech, he said, I recognize as an ordinary citizen now that I can also feel the weight of the things that you talk about. I encourage leaders to understand that the leadership that they have is borrowed from the citizens. I request them to listen to them and not to talk at the citizens.
Yeah, but did he contribute? Yeah, but just to clarify, did he contribute to the current debt that Kenya is having to pay back?
Yeah, certainly yes, he did contribute, because debts were taken, and Kenya has always taken debts. Kibaki took leadership in 2002 when Kenya was totally in debt. So presidents, when they are in office, they always take money from the IMF and World Bank. It has always been there. Yeah. But it has been overplayed to the advantage of the current regime, so that they continue to do there are things that citizens are not happy about. Yes, indeed, President Uhuru contributed, to answer your question.
Yeah, so I mean, so it's if the finance bill had come a couple of years earlier, maybe we would have had similar protest, during Uhuru Kenyatta's government, or maybe not. There's so many things, and it might even be heartbreaking for those who believed a lot in Uhuru Kenyatta, as with the way that he came into office. It seemed like he was changing status quo. He was he struggled a lot, basically before getting into office. I also want to talk about those who have lost their lives. There's 5 lives that have been lost. Nobody's happy about that. Is there any information as to how these people, how they lost their lives?
I was in town yesterday in the morning, just before the protests began, and I went late in the evening, and I was again there this morning just to assess the situation. It is bad. The vandalism that you witness around Parliament and all the major roads, the shops have been vandalized. Yes, it is true that the protests actually got out of hand. Now, on the question, if at all it was the president, Uhuru in power, perhaps then there could have been more protests. What we're saying, and from a political observer perspective, I see that what the president is not doing very well is managing the optics around himself and the governance principles that he should uphold. He every time he speaks, he never changes his tone to appear to assuade or persuade Kenyans to see from his point of view. He seems to be very forceful, and he seems to be a solo man in charge of the government. And he reiterated yesterday that I am the head. If you look at his speech, he said, I'm the head of this government. I am in charge. And therefore, something of such magnitude will not be allowed to happen. Therefore, yes, problems have continued to exist in the past, and we have seen coalition governments or extending a political hand, so that you can help manage the masses. What he has done is that he essentially deals with his MPs in the UDA government who answer to his tune. They are given a particular direction which all of them have to go by. And that's why you see most of his closest allies suffered the major brand of the protests yesterday, some of them having their houses burnt. So what he's not managing well is the optics around his leadership and appearing to be quite reconciliatory as opposed to what he is currently, which appears to be very, fist-handed.
On this side, we hope for calm in Kenya. Of course, Nigerians who've watched this interview now, and of course have followed the protests, would almost be able to relate exactly with, similar emotions. But we hope for peace and we hope for calm in Kenya, and of course, no more loss of lives. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Awino Gilbert and Mr. Demas Kiprono, for your time. We'd love to speak with you again. Stay safe.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
In a way, does this sort of remind you of the challenges that we had here in Nigeria, the NSAS protests?
Yeah, every single thing.
Yes.
The NSAS, part where, of course, the Nigerian government, I remember, was seeking out the leaders of the protests, and the protesters kept saying that we don't have any leaders. I've seen that if you follow the conversations in Kenya, they said the same thing. And also the things that are triggering the protests in Kenya also, the government seems to be taking a lion's share, don't seem to be, considerate of what people are dealing with.
It's something that is still prevalent. And many people argue that that's still somewhat the reality in Nigeria, with the government, the citizens saying that you're asking us to cut
tighten your belt.
Our belts, but you're not doing
same statements being used, in these two countries. Tighten your belt, but the government doesn't seem to be doing the same thing, and so it will lead to a lot of frustration. And I've seen people say that government here in Nigeria, and of course in other parts of the continent, should pay very close attention to what's going on in Kenya, because you really cannot tell when these things will erupt. Absolutely. It would take the slightest thing, to trigger 1 million people to get on the streets.
And that's because when William Ruto came into office, there was so much hope. I mean, we covered the Kenya elections.
I remember.
There was so much hope. The margin between him and Raila Odinga.
I remember.
Raila Odinga was a force. He came and upturned Raila Odinga's chances and, overtook Uhuru Kenyatta.
Especially when Uhuru Kenyatta wasn't even supporting him.
Yes. Right? And Uhuru never supported him. So he seemed like that stone that the builders rejected that became the chief cornerstone. Everyone had so much hope. And then he came, and it's been taxation upon taxation. It's literally let the Kenyans breathe. And they haven't taken a breath since. We'll go on a break. When we come back, we have more conversations to look at. But let's let you know that the Federal Executive Council has postponed the memo on the tripartite committee's new minimum wage report. The Minister of Information, Mohammed Idris, announced this after the council meeting in Abuja on Tuesday. President Bola Tinubu is expected to conduct further consultations with state governors and the private sector before presenting a proposal to the National Assembly.
The tripartite committee previously submitted its report with the federal government proposing 62,000 naira and the labor unions demanding 250,000 naira. President Tinubu will review the recommendations before making a final submission. We'll get into that conversation after this very short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Breakfast Central. We, of course, getting into a conversation this morning with the NLC PRO Lagos State Council, Ismail Ishola Dejumo. Good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me this morning. It's my pleasure to be here.
The last time we spoke, there was still, seeking some conclusion with regards the acceptance of your minimum wage demands. Few weeks after, there doesn't seem to be any progress made. Tell us, the NLC's perspective as of this morning. The tripartite committee, of course, has stepped down, or the FEC rather has stepped down the tripartite committee's report. What is the NLC thinking as of this morning?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nigerians, the viewers at home. It's very, very, at this point, I think it's a bit heartwarming for us to see the body language of Mr. President for the Federal Executive Council stepping down the memo on the proposed minimum wage by the tripartite committee. And this will give credence to what we said earlier on, that Mr. President is a listening president who understands the pains of Nigerians. And we want him to demonstrate this further by coming to terms with the current hardship and economic reality we are all confronting in Nigeria. And I think the labor cycle, by the grace of God this morning, the leadership will be meeting the two labor center, NLC and the TUC. We're having an emergency meeting this morning to brainstorm on the move by the president to do a wider consultation. Because he understands that if there is no proper consultation along this line, and this is imposed on Nigeria, has been already concluded by the tripartite committee, might lead to another thing that will not be too good for Nigerians. So we don't want to preempt the president beyond the proportion. We have reposed some level of confidence in him, and that is what our president said, that we want the president to convince Nigeria on his renewed hope agenda as based on the promise of a living wage for Nigerian workers.
Yeah, but it says that, you can't hold on. It says that the the tripartite committee's report was stepped down, to enable the president make further consultations. You, of course, sound like you're still very, very hopeful in Mr. President that he will, consult, further and come forward with something favorable to the NLC. But from what you hear, do you think that the president maybe would consider your 250,000 naira demand?
Thank you very much. It's a going concern, and I told you earlier on when I was on your station that Mr. President believes in consultation, dialogue, and negotiation. And whatever position we have today is still subject to negotiation. It's a going concern. We want the president to look at it on merit, vis-a-vis the demand and the expenditure requirement of even the executive arm of the government. We heard recently when the Senate president was telling Nigerians that even if need to shut down Nigeria for Mr. President to have his protection through the private jets will be considered. So our own too as workers, we are the one that create the wealth of this nation. Our own share of survivor should also be given priority and considered expeditiously. So that is our take. We don't want to preempt anybody. It's a going concern, and they were open to negotiation. And as I rightly inform you, leadership will be meeting this morning to at least prepare for the consultation that will be coming from Mr. President.
Okay, how soon are we expecting to get this feedback? You're meeting this morning, you're expecting to deliberate on the consultations from the president. How soon are we expecting some feedback?
As soon as the president deem it fit to call on the leadership, because we have a time frame to set by the leadership.
What's the time frame?
Much time have been wasted on this move. We understand. We saw the speed at which the national anthem bill was quickly passed, and some other important bill that the National Assembly give accelerated hearing and passage. So it's left for the Mr. President to transmit that report in a memo to the National Assembly, which will give him an opportunity to adjust higher as against what the tripartite committee proposed, which is 62,000, which we have vehemently rejected because it's like an insult on the collective sensibility of Nigerian workers.
Yeah,
62,000. What can 62,000 do in this current economic situation we find ourselves?
Mr. Adejumo, you mentioned. We
are waiting anxiously for Mr. President to do the needful. And as soon as he does that, everybody will be in the know and we'll carry on from there.
Yeah, do we have a time frame? Does the NLC have a time frame we know that is working with? If Mr. President decides to continue his consultations for the next 6 months or the next 1 year, is the NLC going to patiently wait until those consultations are done?
While the consultation is going on, the most important thing to Nigerian worker now is the survivor level, ability to survive. Mr. President, as part of the negotiation that led to this stage we are now, was to pay the wage award, which was initially approved to cushion the effects of the subsidy removal. That of March, April have not been paid. People are highly expecting that to survive. So among other promises. So we don't want to be in haste to the extent that they will say this labor that is not patient, they are not reasonable with the government. Nigerians too can bear us witness that we have been very, very patriotic, we have been very patient.
But the problem here is
to at least revive the economy and listen to our demand. And recently
here's the problem. Mr. Adejumo, here's the problem, and I'm really just sharing with you what I've seen people mention. A lot of people don't have faith in labor, right? And if we're being honest, there's many people who said that immediately labor suspends that strike, that's the end of the conversation. It will just continue to delay and delay and delay, and we'll never really get to see anything out of it. So I'm sure that you've heard those concerns also. And so what is the NLC's response to those people who say that, this leniency and this, we have opened the door for consultation, we don't want to put too much pressure on the president, you were, just there seeing how things go. There's no time frame for consultation, even if it takes the next 2 years. We'll continue to consult and consult and consult while Nigerians continue, of course, to deal with the realities of Nigeria's current economic challenges. What would your response be to those people who criticize Labour that way?
Nigerians are entitled to their opinion. We have our modus operandi. We have our procedure of engaging and negotiating, which is in tandem with the labor law of Nigeria. We cannot go beyond that. Before we embark on strike, I told you earlier on, there are procedures. Even protests, there are procedures that we must give the government. We must give them due notice that we are going to do this if these are not done at a certain time. Our leadership have set a time frame that, Mr. President, now you have the report. It is left for the Mr. President to now do the consultation that I have decided to do. Why that consultation? With the organized private sector who are insisting that they cannot go beyond that proposal. And even the governor that said they cannot even afford to pay above above 57,000. You can see the level we are. So the president needs to engage them, let them see reason. You can see one of the governors that declined that resolution. Our comrade governor in Kebbi State, comrade Nasir Idris. He was one of us. He understands the pains of the labor movement, that the workers must be well treated. And he declined and said no. He take exception to that resolution. Where was the meeting held? These are conspiracy, cook up to whittle down the effort of the labor movement. But we are not going to be, deterred. We're going to be distracted by all these antics. But we are focused. Our eyes is on the ball. We are very, very, determined to engage the president based on facts and figure available to justify whatever they are putting forward for Nigerian workers as a living wage or minimum wage. But aside that, there have been a lot of reform along sustainability or no sustainability. Of recent, you observe that the head of service of the Federation announced that a lot of cleanup have been going on in the public service, most especially those who are outside the country working. Most of these people are employed by politicians, and they will say they take a frivolous study leave abroad. They will be there receiving salary in Nigeria, whereas people who are working hard, left day and night are here suffering. They cannot get something to
what does that have
home.
to do with the minimum wage conversation?
Yes, it has to do with it because this is the argument of sustainability. Government is saying the wage bill is too large. So they have to do a thorough cleanup to know those who are the ghost workers, those who are diaspora workers. They need to fish them out and flush them. So those who are legitimately working for the country should earn a decent wage that can sustain them and their family. And that is the point we are driving to, that the government reforming the public service to be more productive, to ensure that there is high productivity and efficiency in the public service. We are highly supporting that. And that is the only way forward. And government should cut their frivolity. All this luxury they are spending on, we have heard about the jet and some other thing. It's mind-boggling. They need to cut all these excesses. The governor of Kebbi just told us that he needs to cut down. Even governor of Edo State, he said they could afford 70,000 because they have to cut down the cost of governance. The governors across the country should look in this direction.
Right. By
cutting their excesses, frivolity, luxury that are not needed at this very critical time in our nation, in the life of a nation to survive, where workers are struggling with their family. So if they do this, definitely it will come to term with sustainability argument.
Yeah. Will Labour continue to campaign for a reduction in the cost of living, while, of course, it demands an increase in minimum wage? Because there's also those who say that Labour's focus should be to reduce the cost of living and encourage government to reduce the cost of living. Increasing minimum wage is only going to create more problems because a lot of states can't even afford it. Neither can the private sector afford 100,000, 150 or 250,000 naira minimum wage. So should Labour's focus instead be to demand from Nigerian government a reduction in the cost of living, reduction in the cost of electricity, reduction in the cost of food prices across the country?
That has been our agitation. That has been our argument. You knew quite all right. It's in the public domain. We have been telling government that this tax regime will not drive us to the path of growth and accelerated development. We need to look inward and see how people survive. If you tax people too much, definitely you reduce their purchasing power. And that will also cause what we call multidimensional poverty, which we are experiencing today. We have argued, we have state protests on the issue of electricity tariff, that it should be reversed. or reduced drastically, so that people who are in the small and medium enterprises can survive. People who are doing little businesses can survive with the cost of energy. We are also mindful and telling the government that the cost of food items should be looked into, most especially in the area of security. People who are in the rural, who are doing more of this farming, are not having a peace in their domain.
All right, Mr. Dejimo.
Government need to look into it and work in terms with the demand of the labor, so that it will be a win-win. As labor is the demanding, we are not demanding excessively. If you look at the argument, it has always been reasonable. We are always shifting ground to this level, and government should also shift ground reasonably.
Mr. Dejimo, we need to end the conversation here. I think you've made your point. In the next few days, we would see, if there's any developments between the NLC's meetings and, of course, the Nigerian government's consultations. And if things develop, we'd like to have you back again. Thanks for stopping by and thanks for speaking with us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure always. Thank you.
Stay with us this morning. We have more conversations coming your way in the second half of Breakfast Central. Remember, the phone lines will be available, so you could also join us and have your thoughts on any of the conversations that we've had this morning by calling those numbers on your screen or tweet at us at News Central TV. We'll be back after the short break.
Thank you for joining us and welcome back. If you're just tuning in, we are reviewing the front pages of the newspapers this morning. We're joined by Sheson Okwade, Public Affairs Analyst. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, Osaga, and to all our viewers across the globe.
Morning.
Woke up this morning. The celebration yesterday was top-notch.
Oh, I saw you there. You were having a lot of fun.
Of course.
He performed after
he performed that. No, it was after Nasboy he performed.
Oh, wow.
You watched it?
No, we're there now.
Oh, yeah.
We're there. We saw you live and direct.
Okay.
With the Association of Online Viewers. All right, let's review the...
I also saw that you were one of the bridesmaids, chief bridesmaid. I'm like, this your dress was fine. Oh.
He was a
the tailor got it right.
No, but he was one that his corset ripped and then they had to do emergency adjustments.
Wow. Adjustment. They brought those things in for us.
I'm so... It was a successful one. Wow. Let's now get into the business of today, reviewing the papers. And our first paper for this morning is, of course, the Punch newspaper. On the front page of the Punch, crude price hike. Dangote alleges IOC is frustrating refinery. In fact, this story now makes you feel like we definitely have seen this before. No, this is certainly not today's, the one for today. So can we please take it away again? And I'll take the papers from my... All right.
I think I'll
Let's look at the Punch for today, right? On the front page of the Punch for today, Labour kicks as FEC steps down. Steps down memo and demands consultation. Failure to discuss memo giving room for speculation, NLC tells government. That's the conversation about minimum wage. We just concluded the conversation with our guests as well. 5 killed as anti-tax protesters invade Kenyan parliament. At the top of the paper, CBN projects lower inflation, says reforms attract $24 billion inflow. Federal government meets local refiners over pricing and faults Dangote. Senate didn't approve new presidential jet, according to Akpabio. Wow, that's amazing. Court orders Emefiele to forfeit $1.4 million bribery proceeds. And the final story, customs mourn as officer dies at Rep's investigative hearing. That was a very sad one. But that's all that we have this morning. Let's head to the next paper.
Yeah, that was a very sad story. And I think, the moments like that, are a reminder to everyone, who's above 40, that you need to start taking your health very seriously.
Very, very.
To watch, a man, a member, or rather is an officer of the Nigerian Customs Service slump on live television and, of course, eventually lose his life was very, very painful.
Traumatic.
And I can imagine what his family members, have had to deal with in the last 24 hours. It's very sad. Let's see what's on the Vanguard newspapers this morning, major stories that we can find. It says there, President Tinubu to consult governors and OPS on minimum wage, says the federal government. Also on the Vanguard newspapers this morning, it says he can't take decision on new minimum wage alone. Insists the input of governors, local government areas, OPS are vital. Era of paying slave wage gone, says Labour. Any amount above 62,000 naira will create crisis and job loss, says the NECA. No plan to dethrone Sultan, says the Sokoto state government, and also insecurity. NSA alerts on terrorist recruitment plots using media platforms. Rivers crisis, anti-Fubara protest rocks Port Harcourt. Wike not ready for peace, Clark tells Tinubu. We can also find on the Vanguard this morning, DMO attributes rise in public debt to FX reforms and MPR hikes. Top of the screen there, cholera. Tinubu directs FEC to set up committee to oversee emergency operations. And also federal government moves to sell 3 aircraft in presidential fleet to buy 1. A lot of people still don't believe that. Cardoso upbeat on taming inflation, supports measures to boost external reserves.
All right, now let's move to our third paper for this morning. And on the front page of the Daily Times newspaper, FEC steps down memo, opts for more consultations. Passage shouldn't linger beyond July. So that's the time frame that the TUC is given. Emefiele's trial, witness can't confirm whether former CBN governor's wife signed Architecon documents. Akpabio denies Senate proposal of new aircraft for Tinubu Shetima. Article condemns desecration of traditional institutions by politicians. A number of us will agree. And FAN deploys 120 AFSEC special forces across international airports. NASMO's deputy controller of customs, STN. Fuel marketers deny importation of substandard products amid accusation. Social media agog as Davido Chioma wed in Lagos. That's all that we have on the front pages of the paper. Let's begin very quickly with Akpabio denying Senate proposal of new aircraft for Tinubu and Shetima. That's something that excites you?
Yeah, well, it's not exciting me whether they approve it. There are so many times you hear about them not approving something on the surface, but behind the scene it happens. So whether they are approving, they are not approving. We saw the reaction of the spokesperson for the president, Mr. Bayo Nanuga. You know, the reaction for me was really not too interesting. When you are making it look as if an average citizen, we do not even love our president, but we're talking about love is reciprocal. Our president should show high level of commitment on the part of the citizen, then we can reciprocate back by showing the love. Nobody is reaching the president dead, or you want any plan for him to be cut short. But the fact remains that make us happy. In fact, when everyone is happy, you can afford to go and buy 3-4 jets if you care to. But an average citizen that can barely fit. I was on a particular forum this morning before I came in, and you can see people lamenting on the cost of foodstuff. How did we get to a tuber of yam that cannot feed a family of 3 costing as much as 7,000? Our discussion will be on whether the president needs an aircraft, whether you want to sell 2 or 3 to buy 1. As far as we are concerned, that is not our priority. As a matter of fact, if we have that, we want our president to stay within and don't go anywhere and fix our problem. People can have meetings, without traveling and do those things. You can have an engagement with all these bilateral engagement without traveling. Even if you need to sign documents, e-documents are being signed now. We want you to stay indoor, fix some of the problems in terms of our refinery, in terms of security, in terms of education, in terms of health. It will amaze you, the cost of drugs. I have commitment with some elderly people that I offer drugs to on monthly basis. I cannot. A drug of 3,800 now costing about 70,000.
And these are the ones that are even, some of them are made in Nigeria. We're not talking of the ones where...
that are imported.
Exactly, where they had their base in Nigeria before they've left the country.
Now you are importing those goods.
And there are people who have lifestyle that require them to live on these
these drugs on daily basis. These are issues. The fact that the presidential personal, the fact that the presidential jet is having an issue is a blessing in disguise. That will make our president to stay indoor and fix the necessary things that need to be fixed. If he's having an health issue, he will not have anything to say. He wants to travel out to go and take his health wherever. He will patronize the hospital. And with that, we can start seeing, issues that has to do. As far as I'm concerned, that is just me. But I feel that individuals might feel that, no, that's not the route to go. Our president needs to go so that we can sign those things. How many of those bilateral agreements are we seeing contributing to the bottom line? You read in the dailies about Dangote. Oh, we almighty was saying, let Dangote refinery start operation. We'll see fuel coming down to 200. The man is sounding frustrated already. So what is the hope of an average Nigerian in the next few months or few years to come with this that we have? We have commitment on putting the Port Harcourt refinery upstream, thinking that if that has passed us, we can talk of the remaining two. The cost of energy, let me just say this on a very like they took us from band B in a particular place to band A, and I had the cost to buy energy. And within 3 days, they said 100,000 worth unit has finished. I said, no problem. Now open the window and let's be receiving the natural fresh air if AC cannot work. Because now put those costs. You now have to have increase in your energy cost. As you are doing that in terms of power, you're doing that in terms of your petrol that you're putting in the vehicle. These are areas that we need to address.
So that means that you're agreeing that you don't see that the president has made enough sacrifices for the people?
Well, to me, because things are really not working. You need to get out there and see the way people are crying. Now people, when they invite you for parties, that is if you even have opportunity to have, but not like the one we had yesterday. If you had opportunity to have a small party, you put restriction there. You can even say that it's not for couple. Husband alone should come, or wife alone should come. Yes. Some will tell you children are not allowed. Because what an average person does now is that you are inviting us for party. You have like 5 children, all of us children, let's go to that party so that we can take dinner and pack some of food that we can bring. That even the major people. These are issues
those days are long gone.
There are different levels with which the economic reality is hitting people. I mean, you're talking about people who are doing parties. If you can even afford to do a party, that's some grace that you have. There's a lot of people who are not even sure of what they will eat today.
Yeah,
like if that number was 10 million, a year ago, right now that number is 50 million.
Of course,
people who do not know that
those
they will
are
have a meal
areas
today.
I feel that we should start addressing. How we can have food. We now heard that you can't buy tomatoes.
Very soon, cucumber will be expensive because people are looking for innovative ways to make
to mix
with cucumber, carrots.
When you put pressure, it's demand and supply.
Yes.
When you now demand for a particular thing, that remember that before now, nobody give recognition to nose mask. But during COVID, nose mask became the stashed boy that everybody was running after. So the thing you see on the shelf for 200 was going as high as 3,000, 4,000. So when you shift base, so if cucumber is the area of concentration for making soup now, you can imagine the price will go up, and those things cannot just be.
Anyway, back to Rivers State. Anti-Fubara protest rocks Port Harcourt. I saw pictures yesterday. Dozens of able young men on the streets protesting against the governor. And of course, they're protesting pro the FCT minister, Nyesom Wike. So it seems like this would almost never end. We're going to have, similar situation all the way to the end of, the current tenure of Sim Fubara.
The disheartening thing there is that as far as that state is concerned, governance is out of space. Those days when you want to talk about states that you should go, that have this economic empowerment for people. You talked about Lagos. They will tell you that go to Rivers State, go to Kano, go to Kaduna. But as we speak, with the unrest that we have in Rivers State, I'm sure even the private organization are not having a fair share of what it should be. Because when there are protests up and down, you think about your safety first before even considering going to work. So for me, I think it's high time the two elephants in this clause come to a common ground to know that the essence of being in position or in power today is for the people. And if the people are not feeling, the essence of you being in power, then you should watch it. I keep asking the question. Those that are saying that those chairmen of local government should still stay put. You had your 3 years. Whether they are going to carry out election or not, you should be concentrating in that area, not asking for extension. Not asking for extension. If they are going to just come up to say, if you are putting up caretaker committee, if there must be, this must not exceed a month or 2 months.
Can you hold on? Good morning, Dr. Haruna.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Quickly.
Good morning. I thank you again for coming this in. I think having the problem with the aircraft, our president can stay aside and know how much Gary costs, how much people are who cost, how much the store masara costs, and I think the way the aircraft now is spawned, our president should stay behind, remain, and know what the masses are doing and what he promised the masses, as he say, Emilio, for this is the time for food for masses are suffering. And we had the vice president and the senate president say, if you cost the whole life of Nigerians, they will buy the aircraft. The life of Nigerian, hide the whole Nigeria, is the same thing with the life of president. All of us God created us, and God make him to be president, and the masses vote him to president with the trust. So he should go around and check, as you are getting said. Let him know the masses how they are suffering. The one is flying up and he can know what is happening in Nigeria. And the masses, we are suffering. Hardship is too much.
Now for sharing your thoughts. Indeed, he completely agrees with you, and it's a really rough patch. And yes, people are suffering, and a lot needs to be done.
A lot.
And it's not just saying. At the end of the day, I would always say that whilst the government is trying to figure out how to get Nigeria out of the mess, I think the most important thing is the body language. Body language that shows empathy. And empathy is not just in words, it's in actions. If you're saying people should adjust and cut corners, or cut their costs, are you cutting your costs? Are you adjusting as well? Yesterday, we had a guest on the show, and we asked him, he talked about President not being able to fly commercial. And we said the President does have his private jets. Since he has his own private jet, if the presidential jet is faulty, how about flying his own private jets for the time being? And the guest was like, oh, that's pandering towards public sentiment. But many people would argue that there's nothing there. If you're showing servant leadership, you should be able to say, okay, this is how I'm making my own sacrifices for this, for this government as well. Whilst I'm encouraging you to make sacrifices, I'm also making sacrifices.
Olive, you are right with what you have said. And if anyone is saying that is sentiment, we've seen instances where management staff, because the organization could not afford, official vehicles for them, they go around, make use of their own vehicle, possibly the organization maintain, give a certain cost to maintain, because they believe that when the organization grows, they will be able to afford that which is they are actually asking for. And that's what we're saying here, that Mr. President should go all out, make that sacrifice. You see, when you look at is it education you want to talk about? People cannot afford to pay school fees. I keep asking, if my parent gave birth to me now, I'm sure I will not grow up to come on this set to talk, because people like us enjoyed free education, given by the likes of Babaja Konde. We attended public school, and public school was of it. So look at a child of 2, 3, 4 years paying millions for that. I asked the question, what is it there to study? For 1 million? And parents are coughing out this. Can we work on those internal things? And that's why I'm just of the opinion that it's good that we exchange our bilateral signing, but some of these things, let's preach those things that we are saying, that we should sympathize with the people. Let the government sympathize with us by staying internally. Let's have internal visits to say what is happening in Lagos, what's happening in the north. Let's have not them giving you see, people surrounding the president will tell you that all is well. Truth be told. But when you have a first-hand information by visiting when Baba came to Lagos, I was sure Lagos is Baba's base. In Idumota, people are shouting, Ebim Pawao, Ebim Pawao. That's a message to say that if people, they are not your opposition though. Isaleko is the up for Baba. And people are crying, telling you that we are now ravaging with health in terms of cholera, declaring emergency. You can imagine if anything now happens, where will you get the money to buy the drugs? These are areas that the president should look internally to and see how we solve the problem.
All right. Sincerely speaking, people are suffering. Yeah, I think everybody agrees with that. Even if some people would also argue that, whether the president's around or not, whether he's flying around or not, doesn't necessarily mean that he would understand better how expensive things are in the market. It's not like he sends a first lady to the market every month, you know,
to go and buy tomatoes.
That doesn't happen. So, you know, even if it's an Aso Rock, he's still not going to know what's going on in the country.
But they have families that ask them for money, and when
All
you give 10,000 last month, you can't give that person same 10,000,
Well,
and they buy the same thing.
It's not a good look. But Sheson Okwande, it's always a delight to have you. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. And now we'll go on a break. We'll come back to talk about what's happening in Nigeria right next with Which Way Nigeria.
Every now and then, you hear everyday Nigerians argue strongly that Nigeria just somehow defies logic. I've seen it a few times. They say that regular economic or governance, you know, systems or policies just don't work in Nigeria. That the country is just some kind of mysterious entity, and no matter which government is in power or whoever they appoint to lead specific ministries or agencies, it just will never work or prosper because for some reason, Nigeria just defies logic. I've heard that argument a few times. And so this morning, I beg to differ. I say that our country doesn't defy logic. Our nation isn't different from any other, and most developmental policies that have improved other nations will also work here in Nigeria as well, but only if we are sincere. They would work only if the Nigerian government is also sincere with itself and with its citizens. There isn't anything mysterious about improving Nigeria's economy or the agricultural sector, for example, if we really just put the right things in place. Things like steady electricity, adequate security for farmers and those, of course, who have been killed, and agricultural infrastructure that have been burnt and destroyed by bandits and the likes over the years. Those who want to invest in agriculture will be more welcome if we had security and electricity. Good roads and proper storage facilities like silos to reduce wastage of farm produce between the farmer and the consumer. These are really basic concepts that our great nation still struggles to have. And no matter how many loans and bags of fertilizer you give to farmers, we would almost never improve Nigeria's agricultural story. So again, Nigeria doesn't defy logic. We just have refused to be honest. We fight corruption every administration. You see it just like clockwork by appointing a new head of the EFCC after the previous one is either kicked out or maybe accused of corruption and dropped. But yes, a new one comes in and continues the process with, very minimal results. But the question is, how can you fight corruption with an ailing justice system? How do you fight corruption when there are personalities that are bigger than the institutions? How do you claim to fight corruption when you can't boast of transparency and accountability within your own government, or transparency in the procurement process of your own government? A government that swims in nepotism cannot claim to be fighting corruption. A government where the legislative, executive, and judiciary refuse to keep each other in check, they are all siblings. They can't claim to be fighting corruption. And these are the simple truths about Nigeria that make me say again that Nigeria doesn't defy logic. We have just refused to be honest. We claim to want to improve crude oil production, to meet our OPEC quota, and then earn more and fund our budget. But at the same time, we hear every day about how Nigeria's crude is being stolen. Almost every week or every quarter, there's a news story. And that is the true picture of things. From one newspaper to the other. Look at this one. 80% of Nigeria's crude stolen. Just look at this one. It says the National Security Advisor, Nuhu Ribadu, stated in 2023 that the country lost 400,000 barrels per day to theft. A former Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Timi Silva, said Nigeria lost at least 700,000 barrels per day to thieves in 2022. It is mind-boggling. But this is the true picture of things. That we want increased production of crude oil. We know that it is getting stolen. And every year we continue to make projections on how our budget, should work with these projections. And then we fail to meet those projections because of the same theft of crude oil. And yet these ghosts continue to steal the same crude oil. So the Nigerian government, of course, must be asked at some point, when are we going to end the theft? And who is being dishonest when you project 1.7 million barrels per day, knowing that we wouldn't meet that target. And yet we do absolutely almost nothing to end the theft of crude. And then we go and borrow money to fund the budget. Again, Nigeria doesn't defy logic. We're just not being honest with ourselves. And I'll end by saying the most interesting aspect of all of this is that we all know these things. Everybody knows these things. Call the nearest policy analysts to you, and they will properly analyze these things and tell you, how easy it is to really just sort out Nigeria's issues. These are things that economists and public policy experts have been saying for many, many years. Yet, there's just nobody within government, nobody that has been, appointed by government that seems to know these same things that analysts will tell you easily across Nigeria. Again, Nigeria does not defy logic, and Nigeria can actually work. We're just not being honest. Good morning, Nigerians.
As the global community marks the 2024 International Day Against Illicit Drugs and illicit trafficking, Nigeria joins the world to commemorate World Drug Day, a day set aside to raise awareness about the dangers of drug abuse and illicit drug trafficking. According to the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency and NLC, over 3 million Nigerians are struggling with drug addiction, with many more at risk of falling prey to the scourge.
In a recent broadcast, the commander of the NDLEA in Ondo State, Kayode Mumuniraji, said that a strong approach to drug abuse prevention is parental guidance and vigilance, stating that the war against drug abuse must first be won in individual homes. Joining us is the Director General, Kaduna State Bureau of Substance Abuse Prevention and Treatment, Joseph O.Ike. Good morning and thanks for joining us. Great to have you on the program. Let's first of all, get some clarity on exactly what Nigeria's situation is with regards, drug usage and drug abuse. How much of a problem is it, currently across the country? And, maybe also specify if, there are certain regions that have it worse than others.
Okay, well, thank you. The most recent survey we have, which also happened to be the most extensive survey that has been done in Nigeria to answer the question you just asked, was the National Drug Use Survey that was carried out in 2018. And that survey showed us that we have close to a 15% prevalence of drug use in Nigeria. What that means is that about 15% of the population between the ages of 15 to 65 had used drugs in the previous year. While that might not seem like a tremendously high number when you think just 15%, you may want to consider that the global prevalence is about 5%, which means that Nigeria has a prevalence rate that is about 3 times that higher than that of the global prevalence when we consider it from that perspective. Now, when we talk about how does this vary from region to region, unfortunately, the Southwest region has the distinction of having the highest prevalence of drug use at the time. And then, of course, we have places like the Northwest. And these are not unusual, considering that these are also places where we have some of the highest concentrations of population. So the data that we saw there seem to be consistent with what the country actually looks like. Now, this was in 2018, while we're yet to conduct a follow-up, a national drug survey. Projections have said that some estimates have projected that the numbers are due to increase by as high as 40% from the last time that we had this survey. So we're looking at a significant drug use population in Nigeria. And of course, the first step before people develop problems with drugs is that they have to use drugs. So the higher the number of people who are using drugs, we can estimate that the higher the number of people with drug use disorders will be in the country.
All right, let's now bring into the conversation our guest here in the studio. We have Ifedayo Oluwole, who's a drug use and recovery therapist. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's look at the scourge of drug abuse in Nigeria and how well would you say we're faring, especially with helping people who have addictions with recovery? How do we have facilities that enable or encourage these treatments, and how are we faring really?
So I think that is one of the major issues we have in this country is the availability of facilities to help people come out of this. We have a few private ones, and there's one in NDLA that they are doing fairly well, but people prefer to go to these private ones. There are free ones which accommodate a lot of people, and there are very expensive ones that people have to pay hundreds of thousands for like 3 months of rehabilitation and all. And this is why I think the government needs to pay more attention in creating more facilities. I think the DLA are proposing having more of these facilities across the country, which will help people to access recovery tools and help to help them come out of this situation.
What would you say is the typical, I mean, you mentioned 3 months. Now for some of them, they have to stay for about 3 months. What's the typical duration for drug recovery? And also, do we have a number of people that are turning in? I know that Freedom House is one of the people that are very active when it comes to helping with rehabilitation, but is it becoming a common conversation? I always see more people venturing into the space to help with recovery for addicts.
It is cost effective. That is why for people to come into it, they have to think of the cost, what it will take, because it's going to be an inpatient program where people will be there fully through the course of that program. Now, talking about the duration, there are facilities that do a full year treatment, extensive treatment for a full year that help people. There are also facilities that do short-term treatments of 3 months, 6 months. But the basic thing is more about the user be willing and ready to come out of this, and sometimes also how long has this person been on the street. Imagine somebody that have been taking drugs 30 years, and the person comes into a facility. It's more work to do for the facility, and most times that 3 months is not enough. That is why we call people that have recovered from, we don't call them recovered addicts, we call them recovering addicts, because even after the program, you still have more to do. There's a lot of follow-up counseling that needs to be done after the time.
Yeah. All right, let's bring back Joseph Ike. I want us to also understand, because you did speak about, what the current situation is across the country. Can you clarify, for us, what drugs exactly we are talking about here? Which ones are the most used, and also, are there new types of drugs that are also getting into the Nigerian space that people need to be aware of?
Yes. Sorry. Before I answer that question, let me take up a bit on and elaborate a bit more on what the previous speaker had said. We do have what we consider a treatment gap, meaning that a lot of people who require treatment for drug use disorders do not have access to these treatment services. And this is due to a wide range of issues. Of course, we have stigma being one of the major barriers, that people do not want to come out and seek help. For those who want to seek help, it's either too expensive, it's far from where they are, the time they have to spend in the treatment compatibility with their own social lifestyle related issues. So all of these things create a wide treatment gap. And this is not just a problem in Nigeria, it's a problem across the world. And this is why this year, for the International Day Against Drug Abuse, the emphasis is on, if there is a treatment gap, if there's problem with access to treatment, governments need to prioritize preventive measures. While we try and sort out the problems we have on the treatment side, it's very important that governments devote a lot more resources to prevention of drug use disorders. And this is exactly what you see in a place like Kaduna State, where we have launched something called the Kaduna State Child Amplified Prevention System. The emphasis or the focus of this is to look at people between the ages of 0 and 18 years and see what system can we deploy to ensure that we keep young people out of drug abuse. We believe that if there are stronger systems, stronger preventive measures in place, And what do we mean by preventive measures? We're not talking about simply saying to people, say no to drugs. That doesn't achieve anything. To actually have effective evidence-based prevention, you must address the underlying vulnerabilities, the underlying risk factors. What are the things that make people use drugs in the first place? And you must have a system that addresses those things where you have young people and address that issue. And just to quickly answer your question, in Nigeria, everything that you can imagine that alter the mind of a person is abuse. But most commonly, we have cannabis, we have opioids, and then we have a lot more new psychotropic substances coming up. But amphetamine type stimulants, if you can think it, we have it in Nigeria. So it's quite a broad scope of the problem.
I've seen a couple of these balloons in nightclubs. Yeah. Is that also a problem? Is that something that you've also started to monitor?
Like I said, if you can think of it, if someone can take it and it can change the way their mind functions, it can change their mood, you can almost bet that somebody somewhere is abusing it in the country. It's impossible to even keep track. I know there's records of people inhaling toilet fumes, methane gas, and things like that just to feel high. So if we focus on one particular substance, I think we'll miss the plot entirely.
I also want us to talk, and I'll come to you in the studio, to talk about how, when we talk about drug abuse, a number of people focus on the big drugs. They're focusing on the heroin, the cocaine, and all the other opioids. But the misuse of drugs that eventually lead to drug abuse, I'd like you to talk to us a little more about that.
So one of the most common drug use among young people these days is what we call codeine. It's supposed to be a cough syrup. That codeine. Is now, yes, codeine is now being abused by a lot of people, and people started abusing it because of the effect of overdose of this codeine, and somebody will just feel like he likes the feeling of what he gets from taking this drug, and this has gone wide than we can imagine in our society. It is now prevalent in secondary schools, private secondary schools, private universities. We have high rate of drug use in a lot of private universities around the country, which we are creating awareness. And I remember there was a time a facility I used to be with was making arrangements with private university to send, instead of expelling these students, send them to the facility for recovery, because it is another major issue, these over-the-counter medications that people now abuse.
Yeah.
Right.
I think one of the things that we shouldn't, we did speak a little bit about it already, but recovery and, of course, saving lives, that may, of course, be struggling with drug addiction or drug abuse. Ms. Haike, speak a little bit more about that. Does the NDLEA or Nigerian government or private individuals need to invest more in rehab facilities for these persons? What is a thing that you believe that if we have a little bit more of, it would help those who are currently struggling?
Yes, so the short answer to your question is yes. We as a government need to invest more in providing accessible treatment services. However, I think, again, if we look at the model that Kaduna State is pursuing under the administration of Malam Ubasani, you would find that one of the problems we have in the treatment space is that we prioritize rehabs, the big rehabs where people go and stay for 4 months, for 6 months, for 1 year. And that's almost as if we assume that the problem of addiction develops over.
All right. It does seem like we're struggling with the network. Okay.
Rehab treatment centers are very important. But then those treatment centers, sorry, I think I lost you for a minute.
Yeah, well, we're struggling with your connection. We're struggling to hear you. But if you can wrap it up in another 10 seconds. Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, yes. So I was explaining that the treatment centers, those big rehabs, actually focus on severe cases of addiction. We don't have treatment centers that cater to when the problem newly arises. So the earlier onset of drug use disorders, or the secondary level when there they're mild to moderate, not necessarily yet severe. And this is why the country's drug control master plan calls for setting up drop-in centers at the primary care level so that people who just begin to have drug use disorders can go for very basic services that don't require inpatient admission. If it extends beyond that, then they move to the secondary level where they could stay maybe for 2 weeks to 4 weeks to 6 weeks without having to stay for 4 months. If the problem extends beyond that, then we can look at moving them to a rehab center where they would need to stay for longer. By having a wider range of treatment options available, we also make treatment services a lot more accessible to people. What we do know as a fact is that treatment works. We have a lot of evidence to show that these different types of treatment work. And the earlier we initiate treatment services, the better the outcomes in general. So one of the things we need to look at is how can we expand the scope of the services that we have to cover this treatment gap that exists. But you have to remember that treatment is very expensive. And so again, the advice that today is calling for that the UNODC, the World Health Organization,
Unfortunately, we would have to interject at this point because we have to come to the end of the show. But we thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. We hope that we can win the war against...
global communities coming together to say to podcast and expense.
All right. We hope that we can win the war against drug abuse and that the time comes when we have to travel to certain countries, especially in Asia, and they're not telling you to go and bring NDLEA visa clearance because you need to prove with your 2 guarantors that you're not into drugs in any way. But thank you so much for joining us and well done on the work that you do.
Thank you.
All right. As we come to the end of today's show, we would like to say on behalf of all of us here on Breakfast Central and collectively all of us here on News Central, a very, very happy birthday to the MD of News Central Television, Mr. Kayode Akintemi, who is a year older today. We thank you very much for your exceptional leadership and we wish you a wonderful year, not just this year, but in the many years to come.
Absolutely. Happy birthday to Kayode Akintemi. He gave me my first shot at TV in 2020, just in the middle of the pandemic back then. So, of course, he is definitely, a major part of my story as a TV and a broadcast journalist on television. So happy birthday to him, and we, of course, will continue to celebrate you.
Yes, and I'm certain that HR is going to ensure that in celebration of our MDCEO's birthday, everybody is going to get free food today, an increase in salaries, and the church said, Amen. This concludes our show for today. We thank you for joining us. We'll see you again tomorrow. I am Olive Emodi.
And I am Osaogi Ogbon.